You are listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. I'm Elena Paventa, Executive Communication Coach and TEDx organizer. With each episode, I'll share with you communication tips and ideas from top business leaders to help you excel in your career. In today's episode, we have a special guest, Gabrielle Dolan. And Gabrielle is a book author. In fact, her last book was released last week and it was a huge success. She will share about this in a moment. She's an educator, she's an international speaker, and she's specializing in communication and in business storytelling. So this is what we're going to speak about today. Gabrielle, can you share with us a little bit about your latest book and why it was such a great success?
Yes, thanks, Elena, for being part of your podcast. So my latest book is called Magnetic Stories, Connect with Customers and Engage Employees with Brand Storytelling. And it was released early March, and we've just received the figures. You sort of hope that it it might make the top 100 or the top 50 or the top 10. And it debuted at number 2 in Australia as one of the business and management books. So I was blown away with that, and it's a really good start. And I looked today, and globally on Amazon, it was number 12 on the Kindle books in business management. So early signs, amazing. Early signs. It's got a really broad reach and a wide audience and a good message. So that's all you want from an author, that people actually enjoy reading your book.
That's amazing. Congratulations. So you're an expert in storytelling for businesses. So why do you think that storytelling is so important in business right now?
Well, I think it's one of the things, Elena, I think it's always been important, but I think only recently people have started to appreciate how important it is. I used to work at one of the largest banks in Australia 17 years ago. And what I noticed, that the really good leaders were sharing stories, the great companies were sharing their stories, the great communicators were sharing stories. And so 16 years ago, I left that corporate job to teach people how to use stories more effectively in business. And what I've found over the last couple of years, there's been a greater appreciation of the power of story. And I think more so in the last 12 months, when we have been, physically disconnected from everyone, that this need for human connection is more important than ever. And people are realizing that sharing stories is a way to create that human emotional connection, whether it's with your employees or it's with your customers.
Yes, absolutely. We need this human connection so much right now. So what are the typical common mistakes that companies make when they start using storytelling?
Look, I think one of the typical mistakes I'm seeing when they start using storytelling is they think, okay, so storytelling is really easy because we do it in our personal life. And so they think they can just sort of tell their people to start sharing stories and without teaching them. So I think that's a common mistake. When it comes to, entrepreneurs and small business, and, maybe they don't have hundreds or thousands of leaders to educate, I think one of the common mistakes I see is that they actually don't understand the power of their stories. So either how the company started or how a product was developed. They don't actually appreciate the power of the story. If I can give you an example of what I mean by a really powerful story, a powerful brand story, is it's a story about Barbie. So Barbie actually turned 62 a couple of days ago on the 9th of March. And growing up, I was never really into dolls, and I never had a Barbie. And when Barbie was sort of being shamed as a bad role model for girls and poor body image for girls, I happily went along with that story. But in doing research for the book, I actually I came across the backstory of Barbie. And the backstory is that Barbie was invented by Ruth Handler, who was the wife of one of the co-founders of Mattel, the company that makes Barbie. And what she noticed that was when her two children were playing with their dolls, they would sort of pretend they were adults. So she had a daughter and she had a son. And the daughter was called Barbara and the son was called Ken. And yes, Ken and Barbie were named after her children. But what she noticed that they would pretend to be adults. And all Barbara could imagine herself was as a caregiver, where Ken, her son, could imagine himself as an astronaut, a firefighter, a scientist. And so she pitched this idea of producing a 3D dimensional, plastic doll with fabric clothing. And initially they didn't think it was a good idea, but she persisted. And on the 9th of March, 1959, Barbie debuted at the New York Toy Fair. And as they say in the classics, the rest is history. But Ruth Handler, the creator of Barbie, has been quoted as saying that my whole philosophy of Barbie was that through the doll, the little girl could be anything she wanted to be. And that Barbie always represented the fact that a woman has choices. And on hearing that backstory, it completely changed my perception of Barbie. And not only changed my perception, but will potentially change my future buying habits. So I've got two daughters, 17 and 20, and I never bought them a Barbie. But, maybe any future grandkids or whatever, I might buy them a Barbie. And that's the power of a really magnetic brand story.
Yes, indeed, the story is so powerful. I never heard how Barbie was made, but now I think that when I know the story, my perception changed a little bit, and I feel this connection with this brand. So indeed,
and the amount of people that I've shared the story, the amount of people that have read my book, the common feedback, and I feature that story in the book, and one of the feedback they get is like, I've completely changed my opinion of Barbie. And so one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I see these missed opportunities where I would say that story should be front and center on their website. It should be on all their packaging of their Barbie products. And it's a missed opportunity because they don't understand the power of the story.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you for sharing this story with us. So Gabrielle, you have this 5 types of stories, and you're talking about. So what are those 5 types, and how can we use them in our businesses?
Yeah, in the book, I talk about the 5 types of brand stories, because I think, Alana, you talked about what are some of the common mistakes. I think one of the common mistakes is people only share one story, and they tend to share their creation story or the founder story, what it's called. So that's it's normally how the company started. So that is definitely one story, and I call that the creation story. So it's either how the company started or how the product started. So the story I just shared is a creation story of Barbie, not a creation story of Mattel, the company. So creation story is one story. Culture stories is another story. So stories about how you live and breathe your company's values. So to me, culture is all around your purpose, your vision, your values. So stories around that. The other one is customer stories. So how you actually share stories about your customers, but sort of make them the heroes of the story. One of the companies I interviewed for my book is Columbia Restaurant, which is one of the oldest restaurants in Florida. It's a 5th generation restaurant. And they share amazing customer stories. So for example, on Valentine's Day this year, they shared a story of a couple that have spent their wedding anniversary at the Columbia restaurant like for 55 years. And so they went to the Columbia restaurant on their first wedding anniversary and went for their second anniversary and coincidentally got the same table. They have been going back for 55 years, and the Columbia restaurant reserve that table especially for them. And so to me, that's a great customer story where it's making the customer the hero, but by default, you're going, oh, that must be a really, really good restaurant if someone does that. So customer stories is one of the other types. The other types is community stories. So sharing stories about what your company's doing in the community or what your employees are doing in the community. And the other type is challenge stories about, what you are doing to, come up, how do you rise to the challenges? And we've seen so many stories appear over the last 12 months, how companies have responded to challenges.
Yes, indeed. So we can come up with a lot of stories. Right now we have some ideas. So how can we use those stories to increase our brand loyalty?
So one of the maybe I'll give you another example of how that's happened. So when I'm in Australia, and it's like when we all went into lockdown round about March last year because of COVID, there was a gin company called Archie Rose, and they produce gin, and they're only a relatively small company. They're only about 5 years old. And when we went into lockdown, they actually had 15 bar staff. And so the bar closed, and they were really concerned that the bar people would lose their job. So they immediately thought, we're going to change from making gin to making hand sanitizer, because as we all know, there was a massive shortage of hand sanitizer everywhere. And when I say immediately, within 3 days, they had produced 7,500 bottles of hand sanitizer. They'd changed their production, they'd sourced bottles, they'd created and printed labels and made 7,500 cases. And over the next few months, they made over 100,000 hand sanitizers, and not only secured the jobs for their 15 employees, but were actually able to employ another 15 employees that had lost their job in the region. And this story, they shared this story, and it got picked up globally around the world. People were sharing this story. And when I spoke to the head of marketing at Archie Rose, she said that it doubled their database. So it actually doubled their database, increased their social media following by about 30%, and raised their brand awareness, she believes, 12 to 18 months ahead of what they would have been. And it's not only the brand loyalty they got from their customers because of that story, but also you'd imagine the brand loyalty they got from their employees. So it's not as if they did it for the story. They did it because it was the right thing to do, but sharing the story and being proactive in sharing the story meant it got wider coverage than it would normally have got.
Yeah. So the story is really amazing. But what do you think? What about the companies that don't have such amazing stories of success? So what can they do, and how can they use stories to increase their brand awareness and brand loyalty?
Yeah, look, again, one of the I sort of wrote the book for two reasons. One, I could see people trying to do brand storytelling and share their stories and doing it wrong. And probably the main reason is I would come across companies that had these great stories, but they didn't realize how powerful they would be. So sometimes we sit there and go, well, we don't have any really powerful stories to share. And I actually challenge that, because I think they do. It's just finding them. It's finding those stories. Normally when you go to a company, they all started for a reason. And it's normally started for a reason, selling the why, and they've had challenges, but I think they just don't understand that people would be interested, or they think they're not big enough to share. But it's normally those little challenges we have, those little examples of an employee doing one really nice thing for a customer, those examples of an employee doing just really some nice things in their community. They're the most powerful. So we don't, it doesn't have to be the, changing from making gin to hand sanitizer. It could be something a lot more simpler, just by providing great customer service could be a beautiful brand story.
Yeah, indeed. We have so many stories inside of us. We think that people are not interested, but this is something that can connect us to our potential customers. And what about small businesses? So if we are just starting, how to start with storytelling when, for example, there are entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs, or just small businesses that maybe are running for 1 year or 2 years. Where to find those stories and how to share them?
Yeah, I think almost when you're a small business and you don't have, I guess, the brand name and you're not well known, those stories are almost more important for small businesses, because a good story means you can share it, but then your employees will share it and your customers will share it. So you have this ripple effect of getting your name out there. I'll give you another example of a missed opportunity. Was a very small, very new childcare centre, and I met the owner of the childcare centre, and they'd only been open for a few years. And I got talking to her, and I was just asked a normal question: how did you get into childcare centres? And she told me that she used to be a dentist, and I went, well, that's a big change. And she literally told me that she tried to get pregnant for a long time. She'd been trying to get pregnant. And when she finally had a child and went to find a childcare centre, she wasn't happy with any of them. And she was so unhappy with them all that she bought one and changed it into the childcare centre that her son would be happy in. And when she told me this, I just said, please tell me that story is on your website, because if I was looking for a childcare centre, all I'd need to do is read that story and I would be booking my child into that childcare centre. And she said, no, it's not, because she goes, oh, it's a story we sort of share internally, but we don't share it externally. And you go, that is such a missed opportunity. Like that would increase their brand, it would increase their market share, increase their profits, all that other stuff based on that one story.
Yes, indeed. It's also a powerful story. So yeah, thank you, Gabrielle, for sharing all those examples. They're so inspiring. So to sum up, what would you recommend for businesses? Like a couple of main tips, how to use stories, where, and yeah, how to do it.
How to do it. Okay, I think my main tips, it's sort of, part of the book is how you would do this. And one is, I think, define your brand. So what is it you actually want to be known for? So being very clear on that. Then it's a process of finding a variety of stories. So, the 5 types of stories we talked about, creation, culture, customer, challenge, community, finding those, like, lots of types of stories. And then actually being really creative of where to share them, and share them both internally and externally. So there's been sharing. And I think it's also making sure that your employees, now whether it's 1 employee or 2 employees or 100 employees, making sure that they're aware of brand storytelling, because if they're having interactions with customers, they're in a position to create stories all the time, where your customer will then go share about the great experience they've had. So they're sort of my tips.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. So, Gabrielle, how can our listeners contact you? Where your website or social media?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you're interested in a copy of Magnetic Stories, that's available on all the normal, Amazon, all the normal book retailers, online and in store. If you're interested in storytelling, I'd suggest you go to my website, so gabrielledolan.com, and sign up for my 7-day storytelling starter kit. And what it will just give you an email once a day for 7 days. It's free. And it's just sort of what it says. It will just get you started on storytelling. It will just help you start thinking about how I could use stories. So I'd recommend go to my website, gabrielledolan.com. There's heaps of other stuff there as well, but that's a good place to start, the 7-day storytelling starter kit.
Perfect. Thanks for this offer. We will put your website under the episode so that our listeners can sign up for your 7-day challenge. And thank you so much for offering this. Thank you very much for being with us today. It was amazing to hear all those inspiring stories. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Alana. Thanks for being part of it.
Thank you for listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. Did you enjoy this episode? Let me know that you listened by tagging me in your LinkedIn profile and using a hashtag Ideas and Leaders. See you in the next episode.